Today is Thursday, April 4th, and you have found the Living Youth Podcast. My name is John Robinson, and I'm here with my podcast co-host, Mr. Wallace Smith. Mr. Smith, how are we doing this morning?
I am feeling fantastic, frankly. It's a busy day. End of the week. A lot of things to take care of, but at the same time, no, very good. Thank you for asking, Mr. Robinson. You're always so kind asking how I'm doing. Thank you.
Well, we're back to a topic we had considered covering some months ago, ran into a couple of difficulties with it, but the topic today is more or less based on a question that we had from a listener. And what is our topic today?
Well, it is, and I'll highlight our difficulties were actually more that we had so much to say we realized this is just too much, and we really did want to bring someone else in. In particular, we want to bring in Mr. Rod McNair, who is in with us. We'll say before the music. Mr. McNair, you want to say hi so they believe us?
Greetings. It's good to be here.
Hey, look at that. Our topic today is love and respect.
Love and respect. And if you talk about love, respect, and respect, how can you not have Mr. McNair on the show?
Exactly. Thanks for hanging around. And again, you have found the Living Youth Podcast. We sure appreciate you guys listening. And this topic today was driven by a question. I didn't realize how long we've had it, Mr. Robinson. You out there who sent in this question sent it maybe a year ago or so. We've had this in our notes for quite some time. Let me just read the question the way it was submitted, and then we'll talk about it and explain how we kind of launched at it a bit, a few podcasts ago and realized, hey, let's start over and let's do something else. So here's the question exactly as it was sent in. The individual writes, it's a popular saying in this world that respect and love is to be earned. So according to this world principle, unless a child or person behaves in a certain manner, an individual could quickly find himself or herself being disrespected or love being withheld from them. At least that has been my experience. But in Scripture, it seems to imply that this should not be the case. Please explain. And let me say off the bat that I would probably disagree with the characteristic that the world says respect and love is to be earned. I would say the world's kind of in chaos about those things. They would often say, well, respect has to be earned, but not love. Or these days they say, no, respect is owed to everybody, regardless of their choices. And so I would actually say I think the world has no idea what to think about these things. And so you're asking us what to think about these things. Well, the base questions that I see in this question are, how love and respect supposed to work? Are they owed without condition to everyone, or are they owed, from everyone? They should be expected without condition. Does a child have to earn love from its parents and earn respect from its parents? Are love and respect the same thing? Do love and respect play different roles in different relationships? So Mr. Robinson and I first tried to broach the topic a few podcasts ago. Y'all never heard it because we realized we're doing a terrible job with this. We just got in deeper and deeper, and the more
that is actually true.
Thank you for the validation. And I think we had good ideas. We thought marriage was a great way to broach the topic because marriage really focuses on love and respect in a particular way. Not everyone in the world is your wife or husband, but yet you really learn a lot about love and respect in marriage. So we were going to do that and then branch out for you teens and young adults who are asking these questions. And we just realized we're doing a terrible job of it. And then we thought, brilliant, let's have Mr. Rod McNair on to talk about it so we can lean on him.
The pioneer of this topic in the Church of God.
So why did we do that? Well, Mr. Rod McNair has actually studied this topic quite a bit. He's done seminars for the Charlotte Family Weekends. Some of you guys may have even been here, or your parents been here for some of those seminars. And we thought, well, honestly, it's also just a good opportunity to have him on. So because we like him a lot. However, just so y'all know, listening, he's completely physically he doesn't have headphones on like the rest of us. It wasn't working. So he's just right here at the microphone, ready to go, and just with faith in us that we're going to be able to pull this off technologically. So if during parts of this it's completely silent and you don't hear him, that's on us. That's not Mr. McNair's
So have
fault.
you guys started yet? Or
we have started.
Oh, okay.
Hello,
good.
Mr.
Good.
McNair.
Yeah,
Thank you for coming and being willing to do this. We really appreciate it.
Well, glad to be here.
One of the problems we ran into when we were trying to cover this before was pulling up the English dictionary definition of respect. And I feel like while that's certainly it's an accurate definition of respect, there also seems to be this like lower level, like contemporary meaning of respect that's different. It's like a baseline respect. I think about it in like professional sports athletes, the men in particular. You want the other athletes to respect you in your game and everything, but that doesn't mean they have, which is the deep definition of the English, which is a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievements. Just walking into a gas station store, there's like a baseline of respect that doesn't meet that criteria. So part of that question to me was, well, what about just basic respect? We're not talking about a really deep admiration, which is a perfectly adequate definition, but I was double-minded on this in the sense that a lot of times in contemporary Western world and in English, when people say respect, they don't have that in mind. They're just talking about just a very basic respect between human beings.
Yeah, like hey, you should show some respect. Well, that doesn't mean that you've known this person forever, and it's not like, oh, I really respect my dad because of this. But the shopkeeper behind the counter, you should show some respect, and that's necessarily rooted in. So that's kind of here where we'd like to start. If you could in some way, and please feel free and take this in whatever directions you would like to, but help us to understand love and respect from a biblical point of view, or even a common sense point of view. When we're talking about like this young individual who's sending this question, that we should love others and respect others. Well, like for one, those aren't necessarily the same thing, love and respect. And what does it mean? What should we be talking about when it comes to our obligations for love and respect, or what we should expect from others in terms of love and respect?
Well, I guess to start off, you mentioned that I had studied into this a bit, and I really can't take the credit for the concept in one sense. Well, first of all, they're biblical concepts.
So you're not taking credit for the
I'm
Bible.
not taking
That's good.
credit for that. But there also is a book that has been very helpful, and it is entitled Love and Respect: The Love She Most Desires, the Respect He Desperately Needs. It's by Emerson Eggerichs. Eggerichs.
I've always said Eggerichs. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but Emerson, Eggerichs, and just a very, very helpful. Actually, he does a springboard from the biblical concepts, which I think we appreciate. But a lot of good ideas in that book. But
yeah.
So to start the discussion, I think maybe as opposed to going into the difference between love and respect right now, because the question tends to be a little more directed toward respect and this idea: do you need to have to earn it, or is it something given? And I think the answer is both. Of course, a person sort of earns respect based on their behavior and based on their qualities and skills and whatever. We have more respect when we see how a person behaves themselves.
Okay.
But on the other hand, there also is sort of, maybe a better way to put it is sort of human dignity, that if God has made each individual in his image, then we should treat them with dignity. And it's interesting, you were talking about sort of the woke crowd today,
right,
that is clamoring for all of us to respect others' choices vis-a-vis, transgenderism, whatever.
Right.
Well, no, we do not respect those choices, but we absolutely do honor that person as a human being made in the image of God, who has the potential to be in God's family.
Right.
And so we would not disrespect them as a person, but we certainly don't respect their choices. So I think the Bible is full of examples of where we should treat one another as human beings with respect, for the office, for the fact that we are a human being, and that is a different issue than what you earn in that sense.
Yeah.
Okay, let me paraphrase what you just said, because we're focusing on respect right now, not love necessarily. And with respect, when God says about not murdering, he says specifically to Noah that if you kill another man, that it's murder, and you can't do that because they're made in my image. So there's he doesn't say, he's not just talking about good guys, he's talking about bad guys too. Like Gandhi, Mr. Robinson, and Hitler. It's an odd mix there.
What a collection.
Where that came
Where's
from.
this going?
But
Add in Mother Teresa.
And Mother Teresa. All of those individuals were made in God's image. Right. And by the mere fact of that, there's a dignity that's built into the human being that should be respected. Because God, his about not to murder, that's pretty. But there are also those actions taken. There's things you do where that respect can vary to a certain extent. I would dare say, for instance, Mr. Robinson's behaviors are far more respectful than Hitler's. Just so you know, Mr. Robinson, I do respect your actions.
He was a great community organizer, though.
Oh man, okay, that we're not going to take that out of context. So at the same time, same thing with offices. Like I might know, say, several police officers. I can respect them as human beings, but I can also respect their office, and that's just without knowing them. If a police officer pulls me over or whatever the case is, I'm going to immediately respect that office, regardless of, I don't know if he's a good cop or a bad cop or whatever. However, you could also have an officer you do know personally, and maybe all the more you get to know the qualities that he has, and maybe you grow in your esteem and respect for him as the person who fills that office, where now you're being motivated more by internal knowledge, by something you know about him. But even the absence of that, there's still this base level of respect that you are going to provide just by the mere fact that it's someone in that office. And so I guess there are degrees of that to a certain extent, is kind of what you're saying.
I think so. And the Bible is very clear about that, because Paul says in a number of places, talks about respecting the authorities, honor the king. Who was he talking about at that point in time in Rome? It was, who was the Caesar, and his name slips my mind now.
There was Nero.
Crazy guy, and very awful person.
Even Tacitus just can't help but talk about how terrible Nero was. Yeah,
and yet Paul was saying, "Look, honor the office," and so you're right. There's a baked-in respect, which is, like you say, human dignity as well as office. That is biblical.
I like how you grounded that base level of respect as human dignity. I think that's exactly the right way of looking at it. So in attempting to answer this person's question, it's like, well, do you have to earn respect? Well, if you're made in God's image, then at the very least, there's human dignity in play here, and others should at least respect you from that perspective. But then, as you both have mentioned, going on from there, your behavior is going to dictate the level of respect you continue to get. It's kind of a motley crew that you see out here around headquarters, and so I don't mean in headquarters. I mean when we leave headquarters and drive around. There's the Walmart over there, and it's just an interesting collection of people. So even when I have a real basic baseline of respect based on human dignity for the people I run into out there, there's also some transients and some interesting looking people that are dressed in a certain way, or people that are heavily tattooed and pierced. We're beginning to already adjust our respect scale a little bit, and so the behavior is the key. That yes, we all have human dignity, but going on from there, where does the respect go? Well, it kind of depends on how they conduct themselves.
I have my wife has often talked about how when she was growing up and a teenager, her dad would she let's say enjoyed being able to share a contrary opinion. If as you grow, as you are a teenager, you start to think for yourself. You start to sometimes have a different opinion. One of the things she really appreciated about her dad was he didn't put down her opinion, even if it was clearly illogical, irrational, not grounded in reality. He would explain, no, that's not true, or that's not right. But he would listen, and he would not put it down. And I thought that is actually showing dignity to our children even. And we don't normally think of, you've got to show respect to children. Well, wait a minute, you show respect to your elders. But because they have human dignity, how do we treat our children? Well, we don't ridicule them. We don't insult them. If they have a thought or an idea, we actually let them express it. I think there's so many, and I know that's a different direction, but there's so many profound ways that showing human dignity for another person, even with a child, it makes a huge impact on their life.
I so appreciate that, the way we're kind of just focusing on respect right now, because I think with love, I know with Christ, when he talks about loving your enemies, there's kind of, then what does that mean, right? But with respect, all the more, because that's more what we're talking about even in society. When it comes to the trans issue, et cetera, like, well, you've got to respect me, but respect is turning into how you have to accept all of these other choices. And I think, as Mr. Robinson mentioned earlier, for instance, tattooed individuals. So often we have pressed upon us the idea that, and the thing is that there's always a seed of truth, but it's what you've packed around that truth. The idea that, well, you should respect that person just as much. That's a human being. They're going through experiences like you. They've had lived experience. They've had to walk through in life just like you have, and they've got obligations like you have. And why should you respect them less just because they're, say, covered in tattoos?
And piercings.
And piercings, right? So I used to say that, like your average Chipotle worker. However, I've seen a lot of, it's odd to see, how I say, diversity growing in Chipotle. I see fewer piercings in Chipotle. So I think that's good. They're opening up to others. I know there's people listening that probably work at Chipotle like, I don't have any piercings, Okay, back on track. Well, here's the thing. It's like respect isn't, I think we've talked about this now. I think you've helped establish that. It's not like you just have it or don't and that's it. Well, no, I make mistakes too, for one thing, right? I mean, mine aren't all visible on my, on my skin, but I certainly make my share of mistakes. When it comes to, say, an individual, covered in tattoos, and I know, some in the ministry who have gotten tattoos in their previous wilder days and realize that's a mistake. And again, that's visible. Well, respecting someone like that, one, I can respect them as a human being. You respect them as someone who may have made a poor decision in the past. Maybe now they know, that it's a wiser decision. But at the same time, maybe they don't. Maybe they've got an appointment to go in and get another one. Respecting someone as a human being can't. It seems impossible to be, and certainly isn't biblically modeled this way. And that's what we're about, is how to think biblically. Can't be respecting every single decision that they have ever made in their lives. That can't be the same thing as respect. We respect King David tremendously. We don't respect his choice to commit adultery with Bathsheba. That's not anything that raises his respect. And for some who knew about that they might have been so disgusted that all they were left with was respecting his office for a time. They just couldn't get past, like, well, look, I'm always going to respect. He is the king and God has him in place, but I just can't respect, whatever this is. Yeah. And then, of course, his story unfolds and there's a richness to it, but there's nothing that would, say, make some of those choices suddenly right. And so I know people who've gotten tattoos in the past who maybe didn't know the Bible said don't do that. Or if they did know, they were young and sinning and just did it anyway, and it was a sinful mistake. And boy, they regret that. And if anything, I can respect that they didn't let a choice like that will never go away from their skin change their values. They actually still embrace the fact. That's actually, I can respect that. Versus those who, man, no, I just love it. I don't really care what the Bible says or whatever. Or they're finding excuses to get around the Bible. well, I can't respect that. But respect is this. It's a rich kind of thing that isn't you either respect someone or don't respect someone. You can respect them at the level of being a human just like you, made in God's image, who has potential to be in his kingdom forever, even in a higher position of glory potentially. But at the same time, no, we don't have to respect every decision. And there are certain kinds of respect that can be earned and lost. And so I think what I've really appreciated from the discussion so far is how it really is a rich kind of thing. It's not just a switch that's flipped on or off. Mm-hmm. So when someone says, hey, you're disrespecting me, well, okay, what are we talking about? Is it an action you took that we're trying to discuss that we don't think was morally right? Or is it because you think I'm treating you like an animal, that you're just an insect? And those aren't the same kinds of things.
Absolutely. I think one other reference that is sort of a guiding point is what Christ said in the Sermon on the Mount, where he talks about in terms of not hating your brother, not murdering. But then he says, if you even call your brother you fool or you worthless fellow, you're in danger of Gehenna fire. And that to me also kind of frames the issue that, in other words, we don't have the right to, in our mind or with our words, to sort of say that you're not worth saving, You are not worth anything. You are trash.
Because that's kind of those words communicate a worthlessness.
Exactly.
It's moros. It's like a worthless idiot or a moron.
Right. So you have no value as a human
being. You have
being.
no value. That is not our prerogative to convey to another person. That is God's prerogative to ultimately throw the incorrigible into the lake of fire.
Right.
But even there, it's an act of mercy, and that's a totally different subject.
Yeah.
But yeah, Christ said, no, don't do that.
Right.
It doesn't mean that we have the same amount of graduated respect, as you're pointing out, Mr. Smith, which is earned over time as you get to know someone. But yeah, there's a baseline.
Yeah. That sounds fantastic.
And that would apply to love similarly, wouldn't it?
I think, yes, I think it's a different topic, which maybe as we discovered here, but at the same time, yeah, there's going to be differences. So let's go ahead and shift to that. So concerning love in a similar way, because this is about respect and love. So what I think we can say without looking up some scriptures that we have an obligation to love other people. I think that we recognize that, yeah, the Bible, God is love, and we're seeking to be like him. And so clearly we do have an obligation to love others. But we see different takes on that. In the Bible, it talks about loving our neighbor as ourselves. We clearly should love our parents, and parents should love their children. Husbands are commanded to love their wives. But then Christ goes so far as to say, love your enemies. So you've got love talked about in lots of different ways. Now, the world would often want to paint that as an emotion of some sort, but clearly, especially like when it comes to loving your enemies, the idea that you're just filled with joy and you just love to see your enemy come in the room because it's time for a beating again. I don't think that's what's going on there. If it is, you need some counseling because that's unusual. So given these things, first, let's kind of establish we're not just talking about feelings and emotions when it comes to love. So if we're not just talking about feelings and emotions, because that can't fit all the descriptions of love in the Bible, then what are we talking about when Christ is talking about love and individual? Mr. McNair, what would you say about that? When Christ is commanding you to love someone, of all the people in the world, what is that saying to you? That you're wanting to sit down and listen to romantic songs together, maybe share a glass of wine with everybody? What? Probably not. And especially if you're teens listening, not a glass of wine, right? So what's your take on that? First, just help us to orient our minds about what does it mean when God is telling us to love other people?
Well, I think Mr. Armstrong sort of summed it up the best years ago when he defined it essentially as having outgoing concern for another person. And, of course, there also are different types of love as even defined by the Greek words, philios, brotherly love, eros, romantic love, and then agape, which is godly love. And that's essentially what we're talking about here, simply an outgoing concern for another person, which sort of ties into, sorry for bringing back the respect
No,
issue.
please, feel free.
But it does sort of tie into having respect for another, every person made in the image of God, that they have a baseline of value in God's eyes, and therefore we should have a baseline of outgoing concern for every last person, as Christ said in the parable of the Good Samaritan. The guy said, the lawyer said, "Who is my neighbor?" He said, "Well, whoever's in need." So outgoing concern, I think, is a good way to sum it up.
I appreciate you tying it back to respect, because when I was sitting here thinking about how I would answer it, and part of my brain wandered back to, it's connected to respect.
Yeah.
And I also think it's quite fascinating. This might get me getting ahead of where we're going a little bit. But at first I thought it was intriguing that men had to be commanded to love their wives. But truly, in my study of humanity, and which sounds broader than it really is, just paying attention to things historically, and I tend to beat up on the Romans a little bit more, but what we can, in modern Western society, can fail to realize is that there were cultures. I'm not saying that there wasn't genuine love between husbands and wives, or men and women, but that in general, it's like, well, why? A wife is here to serve me and have children for me and those kinds of things. It's like, I'm far bigger and stronger than her. They have no choice in all of this. But it's not as obvious as it should be to men that they should love their wives. Now, in a Christian culture, that is an odd thing to consider. But when you get outside Christianity, all of a sudden that command makes a whole lot more sense. And I've been fascinated by that. But it's not obvious to the men. And you could even say a little bit where the women are told to respect the men. There's a real gender bias towards these two things. Mr. Smith, where are we headed next?
Well, okay, I think this is really helpful, because if I'm trying to get back to the original question, because I think we've talked a lot about these topics to the point that we can circle back to the original question. When I read that original question, part of my instinct is to say the question seems to be focused on the person we should, based on what we've just said, we should expect a certain amount of respect and love from those around us. And we don't know the context of the question. We always try to be careful about that. Is it person talking about their parents, or talking about neighbors, or talking about a boss, or talking about, a spouse? Who knows? In the world of people, my first thought was, well, on one hand, I always like to set a context that the Bible doesn't focus on our rights or what we expect. It focuses on our obligations. Unlike, say, the U.S. Constitution and those things, we tend to focus in this world about what we're owed by others, what we have the right to. And I think actually Mr. Jonathan McNair did a sermon about this a few years ago around 4th of July, but it really resonated with me, because I tend to think the same way about this, that no, the Bible focuses on our obligation towards other people, not what we should owe from others, but what we're obligated to provide. But understanding where this person is coming from, at least based on the question they sent in, okay, so others are obligated to provide, so what should I expect in that regard? So kind of turning that around. So maybe we can focus the question that way. If I were asking this question, because we don't know, does the individual, feel like perhaps love or respect was owed and wasn't provided, or I would encourage the person, one, again, to think about what they owe other people, but still given that, what should we expect from other people? To me, it clearly, and I suspect it'll be the same for you gentlemen, it's going to depend upon certain choices, because that was kind of the question. Well, should I expect love and respect regardless of my actions, or is it and I know we've set the seeds there, but let's start answering that question specifically.
When I read it the first time, and I am not at all saying this was the correct interpretation of the question, my first thought made me wonder if this person wasn't felt like those around her were withholding love or withholding respect, as the way I interpret it. And I don't know if that's true or not, but based on what we've discussed so far, I would say it's fair to say that any human individual ought to reasonably expect love and respect from their parents and siblings and those around them, even if that doesn't always occur. That's not an unreasonable expectation, that you at least get those things on the most basic level possible.
Right. And that's where I think what Mr. McNair's comments and what we've been saying kind of helps to differentiate, because what does that mean?
Yeah.
For someone to love you does not mean always have to be pleased with every action you choose or have to actually agree. Same thing with respect. For someone to respect you as their child or as a boss or whatever the case is, can't mean they have to respect every choice that you're making, as if all of them are equally valid. And especially in the case of a parent, because there's no context here, but let's just assume that for the sake of this particular aspect of the discussion. If you're talking about a parent, well, like you were saying, Mr. McNair, there's a matter of, say, respecting your child, but that wouldn't mean therefore never correcting your child, never disciplining your child, never disagreeing with your child. That isn't boiled. In fact, I would even go so far as to argue, actually, if I respect my child, the value inherent in my child, I'm going to have an obligation to try to correct and stuff, to actually help them along the life that I'm obligated to try to help them give.
Right. Yeah, I think you framed it well at the beginning of this portion of the discussion, that the Bible is very focused on our obligations, and it doesn't really focus so much on our rights in that sense. Yes, of course, there are certain expectations that we can have in life in relation to other people, but the big picture is God himself came down to this earth, and he didn't deserve anything that he got. Jesus Christ, when he gave his life, when he was spit on and beaten and scourged and crucified, what were his rights? Well, his rights were that none of that should happen, and yet he took it on himself. And so our world is very, very focused on rights, and like you said, there might be lots of context here that is lost in not knowing background. Should we put up with someone abusing us? Should we put up with someone insulting us? Do we continually, if someone is stepping on our toe over and over again, does turning the other cheek mean we keep extending our foot so they can step on our toe again? No, right. I don't think that's what God means. But in this world, it's all about expectation of rights, and that becomes a very skewed perspective.
Yeah.
You use some progressive behaviors that are out there right now that we're just elements of society are pressing us. We should respect other people's choices. It would be fundamentally unloving of a Christian to support. It would be unloving of us to support people who are in some of these sinful behaviors, because we know the result will be terrible. Like there will be nothing rewarding to them. I mean, other than whatever temporary gratification that occurs. But a Christian position is loving in these respects, because we know that those lifestyles and those behaviors end up in misery and death, which is really kind of a profound thing to think about. One of the other things I thought of is, about the love. We are supposed to love other humans unconditionally, in a sense, as Christ did. Yet at the same time, we don't have to love every behavior that they engage in. I was thinking about, asking about your kids. Son, I love you, but I'm not loving your behavior this afternoon. And so that's one distinction I would make. But before we go, I think it would be interesting to get Mr. McNair's perspective just a little bit on the dynamic between love and respect and how it affects the genders. And, I heard your seminar probably 10 years ago. Fascinating. And I got the book and we read it, and my wife and I went through it. But I noticed that goes beyond just husbands and wives, that even just in general, the male-female dynamic gets into that. And I've observed it with kids, especially once they're past, say, 8 or 9,
Mm-hmm.
the boys can be a little bit rough and insensitive. and the girls don't appreciate it. And what is their response? They start disrespecting the brother. They're so hurt by his unfeeling and unloving and uncaring behavior that their reaction, and it's really baked into us. And I thought, as the premier expert on this in the church,
You use those terms as if they're true.
you're the first person I heard in the church talking about that, and it really was absolutely, I don't want to say game changer for
It's
us
clarifying.
personally. Yes, thank you, clarifying, but also to understand that our natural reaction was, and why it was the crazy cycle. I'm feeling a little disrespected by my wife. Well, you know what? What do you think about this? And then she's not happy with my behavior, and it goes back and forth. And just to even be aware there's a cycle like that is pretty key for helping you break it.
Yeah, I think so. And you're right. It does go beyond husband and wife. It's male female, and so to sum up, in Ephesians, Paul. Well, that's the other thing, that the author took it right out of the book of Ephesians, because what did Paul say? Husbands, love your wives, and wives, respect your husbands. And little background before we go any further on that. Does that mean that wives, that husbands should not respect women?
Right.
It does not mean
Yep.
that. Yeah, obviously,
Right.
all husbands, I would think we should have respect their human dignity, just like we talked about a little while ago. But now we're talking about something that is specific to male and female, and Paul shows incredible insight, understanding that for a woman, what is the thing that really fills her tank and makes her feel good and helps her to feel supplied emotionally? Well, it's feeling cherished. It's feeling loved, and I think cherish is about the best word to describe it, maybe, And so Paul says, look, husbands, you need to do that, because that's what your wives need. And then the same thing goes the other way, where he says, wives, your husbands are not going to feel like their emotional tank is filled by bringing them chocolates and flowers. Okay, he says, look, their tank is filled by them feeling like you respect them, like you admire them.
What if they bring the chocolates to the husband very respectfully?
Well, maybe chocolates are good, but the flowers, I think,
no interest.
That would not do anything for me, though.
And it is true, and that for most men, I think they even did surveys, and we actually did a survey on one of our singles weekends here some years ago, asking all of the individuals, men or women, would you, if you had a choice, would you rather be respected and not loved, or loved and not respected? And of course, it's a crazy,
it's a crazy situation.
It's a situation. How would that happen? But it's true that most guys would rather, if they had to choose between the two, they'd rather have respect, even if they weren't loved. Even if they didn't feel love. And so there's a profound thing there. And so I think Paul is just identifying how we're wired. And
well, that's even in the Prince, Machiavelli. If you're that was the advice that would resonate with the men certainly more. Like, if you're a leader and you have to choose by being beloved leader or a respected leader, because you rule with an iron fist, you're supposed to choose that one. That's the more effective method. But I remember when I first read that book, and that question came up, and it seemed so tough, especially if you're trying to think like a Christian.
Say that book. Which book?
Oh, I'm sorry, the Love and Respect.
Still
book.
Love and Respect book. Okay.
But I had to admit, with the men, it's 1A, it's respect, and the love is 1B. Well, we want to be loved. We feel love. We understand love from a male perspective, but at the same time, man, it is baked into that respect thing. And if you're not getting respected, all the love in the world's not going to resolve.
Yeah.
That need for respect.
And as you mentioned, Mr. Robinson, the when it's not happening, then it turns into a bad cycle.
Yep.
the wife, if she doesn't feel loved, she's going to lash out unless she's really thinking it through and trying to behave like a Christian. She's the natural reaction. She's going to lash out and what? Not show him respect. And then he's going to feel more, not respected. So he's going to feel less like showing her love. And you got this cycle, and somebody has to be the grown-up in the room and stop the cycle and say, you know what, I'm going to love you, or I'm going to respect you, whether or not I'm getting what I need in return.
And you have to be in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you change your behavior, and it takes them a while. You could take the other side a bit to
it does.
Relax and let their guard down. And
it really does. It really does. The other thing that was so profound to me, I felt, especially for our culture today, is that you often hear about unconditional love. And this is sort of getting back to what we've talked about before about, okay, you love every human being as a human being made in the image of God. And we unconditionally love our family members, our children, that sort of thing. And women should have the expectation that they are going to be unconditionally loved by their husbands. In other words, even if they're not feeling great that day, he's still going to be loving, right? That's a good expectation. Now, does that always live up to in the real world? No, we're all human. We make mistakes.
We may fall short, but that's what we're aiming for.
That's the
aim. It's worth aiming for, and you can aim for it because unconditional love is a real thing.
That's right. That's right. Even if she is not acting, let's say, at her best, he still should be loving in return. But then the interesting thing that he points out in the book is that why don't we think about respect in that way? Why don't we, as a culture today, modern culture, why don't we think about women unconditionally respecting their husbands? And even saying that sounds weird in this society.
It was revelatory for me to hear him say that. And you're right, it felt weird reading it.
Yeah.
But I had to ask, why is it weird, right?
Exactly. It's sort of like, well, if you haven't earned my respect, I'm not going to give it to you. Well, that's not biblical. Exactly what Paul is saying and this author is saying is, as a woman, as a wife, there is a obligation to respect that husband unconditionally. Why? Because of them being a man made in God's image, and also the office in the role in the home, and meaning that even if he's not behaving at that moment, as sort of deserving of respect, she still needs to treat him with respect. Now, there are all kinds of caveats in there.
Sure.
That if a husband is not treating a wife well, there are things that she can do and should do, and to, let's say, not allow herself to be a floor mat, stepped on, that sort of thing, emotionally or physically. But in general, most of the problems we get into in relationships are not to that degree. It's just sort of personality conflicts, and I just found it fascinating that really the door swings both ways, doesn't it? Unconditional.
As I tried to so naturally, as a man, it was easy for me to understand the respect angle for obvious reasons. But I began to try to understand better. So what does this mean from the female perspective, and what does loving entail? And oddly, the way for me personally, contextualized it the best was by detecting what not loving behavior was.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so easy for us men, I think, in some ways, to drift into behavior that our wives or our female friends or females in our lives. Thank you, because I'm surrounded by them.
You do have a mom,
girls. Yeah, and but because even if you get into the big five personality traits, men have certain traits that run stronger in the masculine side, and the women have ones that run stronger in the feminine side. And what I discovered was I start to become maybe curt with my speech, or I'm not as polite as I should be, or I'm a little. And the word I found that seemed to work the best was like unkindness. You would start to describe my behavior as not being kind or being unkind, especially if I'm gone even further into. You can't fake ignorance. You're actually not being the best you could be, and it was being unkind, and that was the closest I could get to a word or behavior describing the behavior to men that they might correlate to how the women view it. So this would be a great one to get feedback from the ladies.
Well, I appreciate the way you put that, because the book and the concepts in terms of thinking of myself, also in terms of marriage, is you have say the husbands, and we've been married for more than 30 years. We have our moments where I've kind of thought, well, I don't understand why not that she would ever say this, but why you doubt my love for you. I know I love you, in my heart. But then you have to say, well, but what's coming across? Spending too much time at work, not coming home. Well, in my heart, I might be thinking I'm putting food on the table and the rest. But from her perspective, it just looks unloving. It looks like you'd rather do this than that. And having to recognize that, well, it's not just a matter of whether love for her is stored in my heart. It has to be communicated. She needs to know that I love her. And so if it's not being communicated to her, what value is it really doing? But then recognizing, like the book would highlight, that goes the other way around. A wife who feels great respect for her husband, but yet he doesn't feel respected. Well, then both of them would have to take a look at that scenario. Maybe he's not looking where he should, but also what you've mentioned, Ms. Robinson, then the onus would be on her also to consider, well, if he's feeling disrespected, how might I even accidentally be communicating disrespect? And do I need to consider things I'm doing that he is sensing as disrespectful, instead of just dismissing him as saying, oh, you shouldn't take that as disrespectful.
Right.
Just like she wouldn't want him to turn and say, you shouldn't take that as unloving.
Right.
Well, the idea that that does flow both ways, it was actually a remarkable observation from the book that of course it's right there in Scripture, but the fact that he put it that way, and it was really helpful.
That helped me a lot, because he does emphasize that, look, in a normal marriage, your wife is probably not consciously trying to be disrespectful to you. Sure, sometimes.
Right.
But I found that I would interpret my wife occasionally as being kind of disrespectful, and then I had to monitor this for a while and watch and go, she's not trying to be disrespectful.
Yeah.
So imagine a Christian attitude, like cut people some slack and give them some room and don't assume the worst. And
how unusual and odd. What a weirdo.
I think that's a excellent point that he makes in the book, and you're bringing out, Mr. Robinson, that so many problems are solved when we stop assuming, let's say, a person is out to get us, or assuming a person is, their intentions are ... They don't like me. They're trying to make me feel bad, as opposed to, what? They're a generally well-meaning person, but maybe they're having a bad day, or maybe they are feeling, awkward, or they're feeling tired, or they're feeling embarrassed, or they're feeling fearful. We can all do a lot of things that we would never intend to do when we're feeling in a corner, or when we're feeling in a bad way, or just having a bad day. And just acknowledging that, well, maybe this person is just having a bad day. Actually, like you're saying, it goes far beyond just husband-wife relationships. It also goes parent and children relationships. As a child, as a person growing up, as a teenager, there might be times when we feel like our parents are really out to get us, and they're just, it seems like
clearly mom and dad are trying to ruin my life.
They really are trying to ruin my
life all the time.
And we do have to, again, have a caveat. There truly are terrible abusive situations that we shouldn't sugarcoat. On the other hand, I think in most cases, We're talking about people who are well-meaning and who in family dynamics have bad days and have personal issues they're dealing with. And it just goes so well, it helps so much to assume that each one is well-meaning.
I've thought of the Christ command, but advice about going the extra mile, and how sometimes, like, let's say I'm a kid and dad just seems to be in a grumpy mood today for some reason, or mom, let's say dad. Well, I don't know what happened at work. I could ask, maybe who knows what it is. But if that's not really the norm, then rather than take everything personal that day or the next, treat it like he's someone, like Christ is saying, who's asking me to go the extra mile with him that day, a little further than I would be obligated to go. I'm not saying a child isn't obligated, but just go with that. That, am I willing to do that? Clearly, he needs a little more from me than he normally would. He needs a little more space. He needs a little more forgiveness, a little more margin. Well, then why not give that? Because if it were reversed and I'd had just a crummy day and didn't want to talk about it and nobody knows why, hopefully folks would love me enough to give me a little bit of a wide berth, So I found thinking of that in the extra mile context, like, am I willing to go an extra mile? And trying to kind of personalize that has kind of helped me think about some of those scenarios.
You remind me of author Brene Brown. I think I mentioned her before, but this was one of her, this wasn't in her book. She had several lectures, but one she talked about her dynamic with her husband. And one of them was they use a numbering system. So they kind of compare notes. They come home at the end of the day, and she'll say, "Hey, where are you today?" He goes, "I'm like a 60-something," and she's like, "Oh, good, because I'm like a 20-something." And they try to pick each other up. They understand the other one's kind of down, so the other one will put in a little extra effort to bring it around. I might mention one last lesson I learned, which was when I'm trying to evaluate my wife. This sounds so like a job interview or something. It does sound. I'm talking about my personal.
That's a loaded lead-in,
It
isn't
really
it?
is. I'm talking about as I meditate on these kind of things. My wife, I would argue, shows me the most respect, not verbally, but through her actions. So that's the one thing I would just say. We can tend to think of respect primarily as being directed verbally, but so much of it is really baked into behavior. And so my wife does so many things for me that when I stop and recognize it, I'm like, she does stuff for me all the time.
Yeah.
And that's one way that I feel respected. So that's all. Just it helped to expand my understanding of it, to realize things were more than just the spoken word in terms of love and respect.
Yeah. Let me let's see. We're coming up on an hour, so maybe we can wrap up and let me summarize what you've said in the context, how I take what you've said in the context of this specific question, and then if you have anything else you want to add, that would be welcome. So we don't really know the context in which the question was asked, and that's regrettable, because context does make a difference. But let me just say, because the person was really asking about isn't love and respect really owed in such a way that it shouldn't be that your actions should cause someone to withhold love or withhold respect? Well, what I've gotten from this discussion and what you've said, Mr. McNair and Mr. Robinson, is that we'll put in certain context. Let's say you're a child and you're talking about your parents. We should expect respect as a fellow human being. We should expect love as outgoing concern. But in terms of the expressions of those and how that love and respect can manifest itself, really is a function of a lot of things. For instance, let's say I'm a child and I have a parent that is 17, and my I'm wondering, is mom and dad respecting me? Well, one, if a parent respects a child as an autonomous human being who has a destiny and is made in God's image, well, then you're going to respect that person as definitely making free choices, but you're also going to want to be motivated to help that individual understand what it means to make those choices. Because one day they're going to be out in the world just like you've been, and you respect their capacity to one day be that, and you have a job as a parent to invest in that person because you respect them. if you didn't respect them, you wouldn't invest in them. You wouldn't really care about their life or what's going to happen. But because you respect them, you are going to talk with them in a respectful way. But at the same time, you're going to respect them enough to give them the truth. You're not going to allow them to live in a fantasy land. You're going to it's like, look, I respect you too much to lie to you. You know, this is the outcome of the kind of choices you're making. I'm going to have to tell you. But also the same thing with love. If you didn't love your child, well, who cares what choices they make? You know, just whatever. It's not, you know, it's not nothing's going to happen to me because of that. But loving your child means being obligated then, if you're a parent, to let them know when they're doing something wrong that is going to build a harmful pattern of life. If they're making choices that you know are not going to bring them in line with God's desires and are working against the ultimate goal of having them in the family of God, well, then loving them requires you to bring these things up and requires you sometimes to discipline and sometimes to say, I'm sorry, this is a wrong way for you to go. And it's easy to get caught up in this idea the world has that love and respect means just letting you do whatever you want to do. But when you understand things biblically,
Right.
love and respect is not always that really at all. Sometimes love and respect from a biblical perspective actually requires the person giving the love and respect to act in ways that this world wouldn't recognize as loving and respectful at all, but yet which fundamentally really are more so. Does that make sense?
It does.
Absolutely. I mean, in Paul's writings, he talks about speaking the truth in love. So you've got to have your values anchored in the truth, don't you?
Right.
And like you're saying, in this world society, it's whatever's person's truth, is.
Right.
That's where your anchor is.
Right.
No, you've got to establish, well, what are the values that God lays down, and then of course, as we're applying that, and as we're adhering to that, and as we're living that, we do it in love. We do it in a certain way that conveys love, and that sort of thing. But disconnected from objective truth, we're totally lost.
Smith and Robinson.